Imagine giving a crying baby a drug that could kill them. In Victorian England, it wasn't neglect, it was routine. Opium wasn't just for the desperate, it was for everyone. Mothers thought it was medicine. But it was death in a bottle the graveyards filled. No one asked why until it was too late. A nation of crying infants and desperate mothers. In 19th century England, industrialization had turned cities into smoke-choked mazes. Families were packed into dark, damp slums. Parents, especially mothers, worked long hours in factories and mills. There were no nannies, no daycare, no time. When babies cried, mothers didn't reach for lullabies. They reached for mother's friend, or soothing syrup, or the most infamous of them all, Godfrey's cordial. What was in it? Opium, pure, potent, addictive, opium sold, legally, cheaply, and without prescription. Mothers gave it to teething babies, sick babies, fussy babies, sometimes just so they could sleep. They didn't know they were poisoning their children. They thought they were saving them. Sweet bottles of death, Victorian druggists wrapped poison in comfort. These infant syrups came in charming glass bottles, labeled with calming names like Infant's Quietness, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, or Dalby's Carminative. They smelled like flowers, tasted like sugar, but inside each teaspoon, enough opium to sedate a grown man. These potions were marketed as cures for colic, fever, teething, night terrors. But what they really did was silence children. Permanently, pharmacists never warned about side effects. There were no regulations. Parents bought death by the bottle and handed it to their babies with love. Factories, filth, and fatal naps. Why did mothers turn to opium? Simple. They were desperate. Working-class women were forced to leave infants home alone for 12 to 16 hours. There were no babysitters, no maternity leave. If a baby cried too long, neighbors might call the parish or take the child away. So opium became a solution. A few drops before leaving for work, and the baby would sleep all day. It wasn't safe, but it was silent. Many children never woke up. Doctors called it failure to thrive. But the truth, they were overdosed, and no one talked about it. The numbers they tried to bury, the British government didn't track the deaths at first. Why would they? Opium was legal, common, cheap. But in 1868, after decades of dead babies, authorities finally took notice. A grim statistic emerged. In some regions, 1 out of every 2 babies died before age 5. Medical journals started whispering about infantile opium poisoning. Newspapers ran obituaries with no cause of death. Churches held tiny funerals, over and over. But no one banned the prophets spoke louder than cries. Addicted before their first word for the babies who didn't die. A darker fate awaited them. Addiction. Some infants became physically dependent before they could speak. They screamed when the drug wore off. They convulsed. They stopped eating. But mothers didn't know why. They only knew that more syrup brought the baby back to normal. And so the cycle continued. Not just for days or weeks, but for years. By the time some children entered school, they were full-blown opium addicts, and society didn't care. The sugar-coated killers behind the counter, you could walk into any general store and buy death for a penny. Behind the smiling faces of apothecaries were merchants of silence. They sold Godfrey's cordial, mother's friend, and quietness syrup by the barrel. Each dose advertised as safe and gentle. But the truth was soaked in blood. Some pharmacists knew. Some didn't care. As long as babies stayed quiet and sales kept rising, the poison kept flowing. Mothers weren't warned, and doctors. Many prescribed it themselves. The church that watched it all, where was morality? In Victorian England, the church governed more than just souls. They judged mothers, dictated behavior, condemned sin. But they never condemned opium. Why? Because it solved problems. No screaming in the pews. No bastard children crying in the alleys. Just silence. Clergy turned blind eyes, because silence was orderly, and death was quiet. The rich got better. The poor got buried. Wealthy families had governesses, nannies, and private doctors. Their children drank milk and broth, not morphine-laced syrup. But in the slums of Manchester, Birmingham, and East London, opium was the only nanny anyone could afford. Children of the rich survived and grew strong. Children of the poor withered and died. It wasn't just class divide, was a death sentence written in poverty. The first whistleblowers, not everyone, stayed silent. In 1871, Dr. William H. Owen exposed the widespread deaths in working-class districts. He described infants with sunken eyes, cold limbs, and lifeless breath. But when he tried to publish his findings, publishers said it would cause panic. Officials said it was exaggerated. Pharmaceutical companies called him a danger to good business. He wasn't the only one. A few brave women midwives and nurses wrote letters, kept diaries, and screamed into the void. Some were threatened, some disappeared. But the truth was out. Parliament turned its head by the 1880s. The death toll was undeniable. Hospitals were overwhelmed with infants showing signs of opium poisoning. Graveyards grew crowded. So Parliament held a meeting. Just one. They discussed regulation. They passed ... nothing. Why? The opium trade was too profitable. Britain had built an empire on it, literally. Why stop using it at home? One lord even said, if it soothes the working classes, perhaps it is doing God's work. And so, the bottles stayed on shelves. And babies kept dying. The morning rooms in many Victorian homes, a quiet room was always prepared for morning. Why? Because child death was so common, families expected it. Mothers would sew black clothing for babies, just in case. And when a baby died from mysterious illness, few suspected the real killer. Opium syrup. Death was mourned, but the syrup stayed on the shelf. The drug stores that killed, you didn't need a doctor to get opium. A few coins and a short walk to the local grocer was all it took. Mother's friend, infant's comfort. These were the innocent-sounding names of deadly concoctions. No ID, no questions, just poison in a bottle marketed as salvation. It was easier to get opium than fresh milk. The broken doctors, some doctors knew. They saw the hollow eyes of addicted children. They heard the raspy breaths of babies slipping away. But they were trapped in a system that normalized silence. Those who spoke out were shamed or ignored until it was too late. The mother's desperation. Imagine being a mother with 6 children. A husband who worked 14 hours a day and no one to help. Your baby won't stop crying and you haven't slept in 2 nights. A neighbor hands you a brown bottle and whispers, "Just 1 spoon," and she sleep like an angel. You hesitate, then pour. That night, your baby sleeps and doesn't wake up. Tiny graves. Victorian graveyards are filled with heartbreak. Rows upon rows of tiny headstones, each carved with names that barely had time to be spoken. Many of these babies died peacefully in their sleep. Few questioned why so many infants drifted away silently. Opium didn't leave Bruce, it left silence. A nation addicted to silence. As the 19th century dragged on, Britain was drowning in addiction, both adults and infants. Mothers kept dosing their babies because they believed it was what good mothers did. The government stayed silent. The doctors looked away. It wasn't just the babies who were sedated. It was the entire conscience of a country. Quiet tragedy no one wanted to hear. In the shadows of chimneys and factories, behind the lace curtains of crowded tenements, a quiet tragedy unfolded. This wasn't a story of monsters. It was a story of desperation, of mothers who loved their babies and unknowingly poisoned them, of doctors who thought they were helping, of a society that preferred silence over screaming. Today, we look back and wonder, how could they not see the harm? But perhaps the real question is, what are we blind to right now?